Before I tell you about the text message that shattered my world, I want you to understand what was lost. I want you to see the before. The golden hour before the long dark night descended. It's important, because the deepest betrayals are always preceded by the illusion of love. Let's go back 2 years before that fateful Thanksgiving. It was Lily's 5th birthday, a sun-drenched afternoon in late July. I had insisted on hosting the party in my backyard, the one Robert and I had spent decades cultivating. The roses were in full bloom, their sweet fragrance mingling with the smell of grilled hot dogs and freshly cut grass. I had spent a week preparing, stringing up fairy lights in the old oak tree, baking a 3-layer funfetti cake from scratch, and hiring a local magician who made all the children squeal with delight. I remember watching Michael push Lily on the swing set Robert had built for him so many years ago. His laughter was genuine, his eyes filled with a father's uncomplicated love. Lily, my sweet Lily, was a whirlwind of pink ribbons and pure joy, her face smeared with chocolate frosting. In that moment, everything felt perfect. I was the matriarch of a happy, thriving family. I had spared no expense. On top of the party, my gift to them was a check for $5,000. For Lily's college fund, I'd said, pressing the envelope into Michael's hand. He'd hugged me tightly. You're the best, Mom. We couldn't do it without you. Jessica had smiled too, a bright, polished smile that, in hindsight, never quite reached her eyes. Oh, Carol, you spoil us, she'd said, her hand resting briefly on my arm. Later, I overheard her on the phone with one of her friends, her voice carrying across the lawn. It was sweet, I guess. A bit over the top, though. She tries so hard. At the time, I dismissed it as a throwaway comment, perhaps a bit of generational disconnect. I see it now for what it was, the first seed of contempt. My generosity wasn't seen as love. It was seen as an old woman's desperate attempt to stay relevant. My efforts weren't appreciated, they were tolerated. I remember another moment from that day. I had brought out a special photo album, filled with pictures of Michael as a boy. The children gathered around, fascinated, pointing at pictures of their father with a goofy haircut or missing front teeth. Michael was laughing along, but Jessica quickly intervened. All right, that's enough of a trip down memory lane, she'd said, closing the album with a decisive snap. Let's not bore everyone. She'd steered the conversation towards their recent kitchen renovation, a project I had, of course, helped finance. Again, I'd made an excuse for her. She's just trying to be a good hostess, keeping the party moving. I refused to see the subtle pattern of erasure she was already beginning to weave. She didn't want the family's history to be about Michael and me. She wanted it to start with her. These memories are painful to revisit, but they're necessary. They remind me that the foundation of our family was already quietly rotting away, long before I was aware of it. Jessica's poison was a slow-acting one, administered in tiny, almost unnoticeable doses. She was an expert at making you feel that any hurt you felt was your own fault, a product of your own sensitivity. That golden afternoon in my backyard was the last time I remember feeling truly, unconditionally a part of their family. It was a beautiful, perfect illusion. And for the next 2 years, I would continue to pour my heart, my time, and my money into maintaining that illusion, completely unaware that, in my daughter-in-law's eyes, I had already been cast as the villain of the story. The only thing that hadn't happened yet was the official announcement. And that, as I was about to find out, was coming via text message. Fast forward 2 years to that chilly November afternoon. The golden memory of Lily's birthday party felt like a lifetime away. I was in my dining room, the very same room where we had looked at those photo albums, and I was preparing for Thanksgiving. The house was quiet, filled only with the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that had marked the passage of my entire adult life. I was living in the present but surrounded by the past. Every object in my home was a vessel for a memory. The lace curtains had been hung with Robert 30 years ago. The sturdy oak table was where Michael had done his homework every night, his brow furrowed in concentration. The slight scratch on the third dining chair was from the time a 5-year-old Michael had tried to use it as a pirate ship. This house wasn't just wood and plaster. It was a living archive of the love I had poured into my family. And I was pouring that same love into this Thanksgiving. I'd woken up at dawn to brine the turkey. I'd peeled what felt like 100 potatoes. I'd baked Robert's favorite pecan pie, the scent of which always made me feel like he was still here with me. This meal was more than food. It was a ritual. A summoning of every happy memory we had ever shared. That's when my phone buzzed. I saw Michael's name and felt a familiar surge of affection. I wiped my flour-dusted hands on my apron, the one Lily had given me for Christmas, with "World's Best Grandma" embroidered on the front, and picked up the phone. I expected a question, a cheerful update. What I got was a demolition. "Mom, please don't come to dinner tomorrow. Jessica doesn't want you to embarrass us in front of her parents." I read the words once. They floated on the screen, nonsensical. I blinked, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. I read them a second time. The letters sharpened into daggers. "Embarrass us." The phrase echoed in the silent house, mocking me. It bounced off the polished silverware and the gleaming china. It felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of my lungs. My breath hitched. My vision swam. My knees felt weak, and I gripped the back of a chair, my knuckles turning white. My mind, in a desperate act of self-preservation, began to race, searching for an explanation, any explanation, other than the brutal one staring me in the face. Had I said something wrong at our last dinner out? I'd complimented Jessica's new haircut. I'd brought Michael his favorite dessert. Was it my clothes? My stories? Was my grief for Robert still too palpable? A dark cloud they didn't want hanging over their festive table? The questions swirled, each one a fresh torment. The phone in my hand suddenly felt immensely heavy, a vessel of pure poison. My hands began to shake, a violent tremor that started in my fingertips and traveled up my arms. The phone slipped, and I fumbled to catch it before it hit the floor. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. A cold sweat broke out on my brow. I sank into the chair, the carefully constructed world of my day, of my life, crumbling around me. I looked at the eighth chair, my chair, now an emblem of my own exile. I was 65 years old. I had raised a son, buried a husband, built a life. And in the space of 15 devastating words, I had been reduced to an embarrassment, a liability, something to be hidden away. The pain was sharp and shocking, but as I sat there in the wreckage of my Thanksgiving dreams, something else began to stir in the depths of my soul. It was a tiny spark, almost imperceptible at first, but it was there. It was the cold, hard glint of anger. The woman who had received that text was a heartbroken mother. But the woman who was about to rise from that chair would be someone entirely different. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed, the words from the text burning a hole in my memory. The grandfather clock chimed 4, then 5. The sun began to set, casting long, mournful shadows across the perfectly set table. The silence in the house was no longer peaceful. It was oppressive, filled with the unspoken accusation that I was somehow unworthy. I couldn't stay in that room. I retreated to the kitchen, the heart of my home, and mechanically began to make myself a cup of tea, my movements stiff and robotic. My hands were still trembling as I dialed my sister's number. Susan picked up on the second ring, her voice cheerful. "Carol, are you all set for the big day?" The simple, happy question broke the dam. A sob escaped my lips, raw and ragged. "Susan," I choked out, and then the whole story came pouring out of me in a torrent of pain and confusion. I read her the text message, my voice breaking on every word. She didn't offer platitudes or easy comforts. She just listened. When I was finished, a heavy silence stretched between us. I could hear the faint sound of her television in the background before she muted it. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low and serious. "Carol, that's monstrous," she said. "Absolutely monstrous. But I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to really think about it. When was the last time you were at their house just for a normal family dinner? Not a holiday, not a birthday, not a meal at a restaurant you paid for. Just a regular Tuesday night." Her question hung in the air, a spotlight cutting through the fog of my grief. I opened my mouth to answer, ready to defend them, to list recent events. But my mind came up blank. I thought of the excuses, the scheduling conflicts, the work events, the canceled plays. Each one had seemed so reasonable at the time, isolated incidents in a busy life. But now, Susan's question forced me to string them together, and they formed not a series of unfortunate coincidences, but a chain of deliberate exclusion. I don't know. I finally admitted, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. My role in their lives had been subtly, expertly redefined. I wasn't family to be enjoyed. I was a resource to be managed. After I hung up, a cold fury began to replace the hot tears. I walked back to the kitchen table and picked up my phone, my fingers moving with a new grim purpose. I opened my banking app, a place I usually only glanced at to check my modest retirement account balance. But this time, I navigated to the Scheduled Payments tab. The screen lit up with a list that made my stomach clench. It was a digital ledger of my own invisibility. I had automated my generosity to the point where I had become nothing more than a series of transactions. I scrolled down, my eyes widening at the sheer scale of it. $2,500 for the mortgage. I had agreed to that when Jessica tearfully explained how important it was for Lily to grow up in a top-rated school district. $900 for the 2 car payments. The SUV was for safety, Jessica had claimed, a necessity for transporting a child. The sedan was for Michael's long commute. $1,200 for the credit card. This had started as a temporary measure when Michael's bonus was smaller than expected one year. It had never stopped. And the smaller ones, the death by 1,000 cuts payments. $150 for Lily's ballet and gymnastics. $80 for their premium gym membership. $65 for the bundle of streaming services they couldn't live without. Each one had a story, an excuse, a justification I had willingly accepted because I wanted to help. I wanted to be needed. I added it up. Over $6,000 a month. Over $80,000 a year. The numbers on the screen weren't just money. They were my dreams of seeing Italy, my plans to renovate my own aging kitchen, my financial security blanket for my own old age. I had been systematically liquidating my future to fund their present, a present I was now explicitly banned from. My finger hovered over the screen. This was more than just stopping payments. This was a declaration of independence. It was a severance. The trembling in my hands was gone, replaced by an unshakable resolve. With a single deliberate tap, I pressed cancel all. The screen asked for confirmation. Are you sure you want to cancel 38 scheduled payments? A small, humorless smile touched my lips. I had never been more sure of anything in my life. I tapped confirm. The 3 days that followed were the quietest of my life. The house felt cavernous, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. I did not go to their dinner. I didn't call. I didn't text. I simply waited. I packed up the mountains of food I had prepared, the turkey, the pies, the endless side dishes, and drove them to the local community shelter. The look of gratitude on the volunteers' faces was more thanks than I had received from my own son in years. It was a hollow Thanksgiving, yes, but it wasn't a sad one. It was a day of silent, steely resolve. I was grieving the family I thought I had, and preparing for the confrontation I knew was inevitable. It arrived on Saturday, with the fury of a summer thunderstorm. I was in my garden, my hands buried in the cool, dark earth, when the sound of a car braking too hard ripped through the quiet afternoon. I didn't even have to look up to know it was them. The way the doors of their luxury SUV were slammed shut sounded like gunshots in the peaceful suburban air. I stayed where I was, kneeling in my flower bed, and watched through the hedges as they marched up my walkway. Michael was a thundercloud of rage, his fists clenched at his sides. Jessica's walk was a staccato of sharp, angry clicks of her expensive heels, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if to contain her fury. The doorbell chimed, a frantic, insistent ringing, over and over. Then came the pounding, a heavy rhythmic banging that seemed to shake the very foundations of my little house. I took my time. I slowly got to my feet, brushed the dirt from my knees, and removed my gardening gloves, folding them neatly. I walked through my house, my heart a steady, determined drum, and opened the front door. Michael barged past me, his face a mottled, ugly red. "What the hell did you do?" he bellowed, his voice so loud it seemed to vibrate in my chest. Jessica followed, her eyes scanning my foyer with a look of utter disdain. "The bank called us, Carol," she said, her voice a high-pitched shriek of indignation. "Our mortgage payment was declined." "Declined? We got an alert from our credit monitoring service. Do you have any idea how that looks? How absolutely mortifying that is." I calmly closed the door, shutting out the rest of the world. It was time for this to happen right here, right now. Mortifying. I repeated, my voice even and low. It seemed to be the only word in her vocabulary. I turned to face them, two entitled, furious adults throwing a tantrum in my home. You want to talk about mortifying? Let's talk about it. I led the way to the kitchen. They followed like two angry hornets. There's nothing to talk about, Michael snapped, slamming his hand down on my kitchen counter. You made a mistake, a huge one, and you need to fix it. Now, Lily's ballet school charges a late fee, and I swear, Mom, if she gets kicked out of that class. I let him trail off, his threat hanging impotently in the air. I turned from the sink, a cup of tea in my hands, and faced them. My newfound calmness seemed to enrage them further. There was no mistake, Michael, I said, looking him directly in the eye. I did it on purpose. I canceled everything. The effect was instantaneous. The rage vanished from their faces, replaced by a slack-jawed, stupefied silence. They stared at me as if I had just announced I was moving to the moon. Jessica was the first to find her voice, though it was a strangled, disbelieving whisper. You can't. You can't just do that. Our entire financial plan, our budget, it's all structured around your help. Help? I asked, the word tasting like poison. I set my teacup down with a deliberate clink. Let me tell you what my help looks like in numbers, Jessica. Last year, I paid over $30,000 towards your mortgage. I paid nearly $11,000 for your cars. I paid over $14,000 towards your credit card bills. Not to mention the thousands more for Lily's activities, your gym, your endless subscriptions. We're talking over $80,000. That's not help. That's a salary. And for my $80,000 a year job, my only job, of being your mother and grandmother, my holiday bonus was a text message telling me I was too embarrassing to be seen in public. Jessica's face hardened, her shock turning back into anger. You're being dramatic. You're going to punish your own granddaughter, destroy her stability, all because of your petty, hurt feelings. And that's when she said it. The line that proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that she was utterly devoid of empathy. Before I tell you her exact words, words that still make my blood run cold, I have to ask you all. If you were in my shoes at that moment, what would you have done? Would you have thrown them out? Would you have tried to make them understand? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. Jessica took a step forward, her expression a perfect blend of pity and condescension. Frankly, Carol, she said, her voice dripping with false concern, we thought we were doing you a favor, letting you contribute to Lily's life like that. It gave you a sense of purpose. It kept you from getting lonely. A sense of purpose. The words hung in my kitchen, more insulting than any shout, more cutting than any curse. She was framing my love, my sacrifice, as a pathetic attempt to buy my way into their lives. A hobby for a lonely old woman. The last vestiges of my composure crumbled, not into tears, but into a solid, unyielding wall of rage. Get out, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made them both flinch. Michael started to speak. Mom, listen. Now, I roared, the single word exploding from me with all the pent-up pain and fury of the past several years. Get out of my house. They scurried out like startled mice, shocked by my sudden ferocity. Jessica shot one last venomous glare over her shoulder before Michael pulled her out the door. The slam of the front door was a punctuation mark, an end to a chapter of my life. I stood alone in my kitchen, my body trembling with adrenaline, the silence they left behind ringing in my ears. The days that followed were some of the longest and loneliest of my life. The righteous anger that had fueled me during the confrontation slowly ebbed away, leaving a hollow ache in its place. I had won the battle, but had I lost the war? Had I just severed ties with my only son, my only grandchild, forever? Doubt began to creep in, a cold and unwelcome companion. At 3 a.m, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over. Jessica's cruel words echoed in my mind, but so did the broken look on Michael's face as he left. Was I being selfish? Was Jessica right? Was I destroying Lily's stability over my own hurt pride? I wandered through my silent house, a ghost in my own life. The joy I had started to find in my own company vanished. The Thanksgiving decorations I hadn't had the heart to take down mocked me from every corner. I felt utterly and completely alone, not just from Michael and his family but from everyone. I was trapped in the narrative Jessica had created for me, and I started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, it was true. Was I becoming a bitter, difficult old woman? Driven by a desperate need for connection, I tried to reach out. I called my cousin Margaret just to chat. The conversation was stilted and strange. Margaret, normally a chatterbox, gave one-word answers, her voice strained. When I asked if she and her husband wanted to get dinner sometime soon, she made a vague excuse. "Oh, we're just so swamped right now, Carol. I'll call you." She never did. I tried again a few days later, calling an old family friend. The reception was the same. A polite but firm emotional distance. It was like I had been quarantined. People were awkward, evasive. It was clear they had heard a version of the story, and it wasn't mine. The isolation was suffocating. I felt like I was screaming for help behind a wall of soundproof glass. They could see my mouth moving, but they couldn't or wouldn't hear the words. It was during this dark, isolating week that I truly understood the genius of Jessica's evil. She hadn't just cut me off from her and Michael. She had preemptively poisoned the entire well. She knew that if she could isolate me, she could control the story completely. I was adrift, and she had made sure there were no lifeboats to rescue me. The loneliness was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I was beginning to lose hope. I didn't know it yet, but a lifeline was coming, and it would arrive in the form of a phone call that would change everything. Just when I felt I was at my lowest point, my phone rang. It was my niece, Emily. Her voice was a balm, warm and familiar in a world that had suddenly turned cold and strange. But her tone was hesitant, heavy with something unspoken. "Aunt Carol," she said, her voice soft. "How are you?" Really? The simple question, asked with genuine concern, was enough to make my eyes well up. I'm not great, honey," I admitted. "I feel like I'm losing my mind." "You're not," she said quickly, with a fierce certainty that surprised me. "You're not the one who's crazy. I have to tell you something. I should have told you a long time ago, and I feel so guilty that I didn't. It's about Jessica." I settled into my armchair, pulling an Afghan over my lap, suddenly cold. "What about her?" Emily took a deep, shaky breath, and then the story poured out, a torrent of calculated cruelty and breathtaking lies. It had started subtly almost a year ago. "Last Christmas at Mom's house," Emily began. Jessica pulled me aside. She had this incredibly concerned look on her face. "She told me she was worried about you, that you've been having a really hard time since Uncle Robert died. She said you were becoming difficult." "Difficult?" I repeated, the word tasting like bile. "Yes. She said you were dropping by their house unannounced, sometimes multiple times a week, and that you were constantly criticizing her parenting. She said you'd accuse her of not feeding Lily properly, or not dressing her warmly enough. She made it sound like you were overbearing, controlling, and unable to let go of Michael. The image she painted was of a monstrous, interfering mother-in-law, a caricature of every bad joke. It was so far from the truth it was laughable, yet my heart ached because I knew, from the way my cousin Margaret had spoken to me, that people had believed it. But that wasn't the worst part," Emily continued, her voice dropping lower. "She started telling people you were having money problems. She'd say things like, 'We're so worried about Carol. She's been making some really poor financial decisions lately.' She implied you were falling for scams or spending your retirement savings recklessly. She was setting the stage, Aunt Carol, making it seem like you needed to be managed for your own good." I felt sick. The pieces were clicking into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a recent development. This was a long, slow, methodical campaign. "And then," Emily said, her voice cracking with emotion, "she escalated it. A few months ago, she started telling my mom and Aunt Martha that she was worried about your memory." My blood ran cold. "She said you were getting very forgetful, that you would repeat the same stories over and over in a single conversation. She even told Mom that you called Lily by my name once." She looked Mom right in the eye with tears in her eyes and said, "I think she might be showing early signs of dementia. We don't know what to do." Dementia. The word was a death sentence for one's credibility. It was the masterstroke. With that single vicious lie, she had disarmed me completely. Anything I said against her could be dismissed as the ramblings of a confused, senile old woman. Any complaint I made would be seen as paranoia. She had stripped me of my own sanity in the eyes of my family. It was a perfect, diabolical lie designed not just to isolate me, but to utterly destroy my reputation and my voice. I was speechless, the sheer, calculated evil of it sucking the air from my lungs. I finally understood. I wasn't fighting a misunderstanding. I was fighting a carefully orchestrated character assassination. And the person wielding the knife was the woman I had welcomed into my family, the woman I had treated like a daughter. My grief turned into a white-hot rage. She had lied about my behavior. She had lied about my finances. And she had lied about my mind. What else was she capable of? I was about to find out it was so much worse. I thought I had reached the bottom of Jessica's depravity, but I was wrong. The well of her cruelty was deeper than I could have imagined. Emily, sensing my horrified silence, took another shaky breath before delivering the final, most devastating blow. "Aunt Carol," she whispered, her voice thick with disgust. "There's one more thing. It's the real reason I had to call. It's about Lily." My hand flew to my mouth, a primal fear seizing me. What about Lily? What did she do? "I was at their house last month to drop off a birthday gift," Emily explained. "And I overheard them in Lily's room. Lily was asking why she couldn't have a sleepover at your house anymore. She said, 'I miss Grandma's pancake breakfasts.'" Emily paused, and I could hear her struggling to keep her composure. "And Jessica?" Jessica knelt down and hugged her. She sounded so sweet, so gentle. She said, "Oh honey, I know you do. But we have to be very careful right now. Grandma is sick. She has a sickness in her head that makes her forget things, and sometimes it makes her get very angry and say mean things. It's not her fault, but it's not safe for you to be alone with her right now. We have to give her space until the doctors can make her better." The world tilted. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. It felt like my heart was being physically ripped from my chest. This was a violation of something sacred. She was using a child's love and trust as a weapon. She was teaching my own granddaughter that I was unstable, unkind, and even dangerous. She wasn't just building a wall between me and my family. She was planting a garden of fear in a 7-year-old's mind. The image of Lily looking at me with fear in her eyes was a torment beyond anything I had ever experienced. This explained everything. The cold shoulders from family were one thing, but the thought of my precious Lily being afraid of me was an agony that eclipsed all else. Jessica had crossed a line from which there was no return. The proof of how far her poison had spread came a week later, solidifying the nightmare into public reality. I was at the local grocery store trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy when I saw Mark, an old friend from my gardening club. He was a kind, gentle man who had always been a friend to both me and Robert. He approached me near the dairy aisle, his face etched with a deep, uncomfortable concern. "Carol," he said, lowering his voice, "I feel terrible even bringing this up, but I think you should know. I saw Jessica and Lily at the park last Saturday. Lily spotted me from across the playground and came running over. She's a sweet kid." He hesitated. "She asked me if I was friends with her sick grandma Carol who gets angry." My shopping basket suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I gripped the handle to keep my hands from shaking. Mark continued, his eyes full of pity. Before I could even process what she'd said, Jessica was there. She grabbed Lily's arm, a little too roughly I thought, and said, "Lily, we don't bother Mr. Henderson. He's very busy." She practically dragged her away, but not before giving me a look that could freeze fire. It was a warning. My public humiliation was complete. It wasn't just a private family matter anymore. My alleged mental decline was now local gossip, a cautionary tale whispered in parks and grocery store aisles. I was no longer just Carol Patterson, Robert's widow, Michael's mother. I was a spectacle, a tragedy, the crazy old lady down the street. That night something inside me broke, but it wasn't my spirit. It was the part of me that still held out a sliver of hope for reconciliation, the part that still made excuses for my son. That part died. And in its place grew a cold, hard certainty. This was no longer about saving my family. My family as I knew it was already gone. This was about saving myself. The morning after my conversation with Mark, I woke up before dawn. The house was cold and silent, but for the first time in weeks it didn't feel lonely. Felt still. I walked into my kitchen and made a pot of coffee, watching the sun rise, painting the sky in shades of pale pink and orange. The world was waking up to a new day, and so was I. The tears had run dry, The rage had cooled into a solid core of purpose. I was done reacting. It was time to act. My first act was one of cleansing. I went through my house and packed away every photo of Michael and Jessica together. I didn't destroy them, I couldn't. But I sealed them in a box and stored it in the attic. It was a symbolic act of reclaiming my space, of refusing to let their faces mock me from my own mantelpiece. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove to the community college, not with a vague sense of sadness, but with a clear plan. I walked past the registration for academic courses and went straight to the continuing education department, the place for hobbies, for passions, for life beyond work and family obligations. The catalog was a revelation, a menu of possible futures I had never allowed myself to consider. I signed up for 3 classes: digital photography to learn how to capture the world not as it was but as I chose to see it; pottery because the idea of taking something messy and formless and shaping it into something beautiful and strong with my own hands felt deeply symbolic; and a memoir writing workshop because I knew with every fiber of my being that I would not let Jessica be the sole author of my life story. Walking into that first pottery class was terrifying. I was a 65-year-old woman in a room full of strangers, my hands soft and uncalloused. I was sure I would be a failure. My first few attempts on the wheel were disastrous lumps of clay flying everywhere, collapsing into sad, muddy puddles. But our instructor, a patient woman named Maria, came over. "Don't fight it, Carol," she said gently. "Center it. Feel where the middle is and guide it from there." Her words resonated far beyond the pottery wheel. That was what I needed to do with my life. Stop fighting the mess. Find my center. Guide myself forward. By the end of the course, I had created a set of 4 beautifully imperfect, wonderfully sturdy bowls. I ate my cereal from them every morning, a daily reminder that I was capable of creating my own vessel to hold my own nourishment. Photography became my new eyes. Armed with my camera, I started exploring my own town as if I were a tourist. I would wake up early to capture the morning mist rising off the river. I learned to see the beauty in the peeling paint of an old barn, the strength in the wrinkled hands of the farmer at the local market. I joined a local camera club, and for the first time I was getting feedback on something I had created. People were seeing the world through my eyes, and they thought it was beautiful. The writing workshop was the hardest but the most healing. At first, I couldn't write about Michael and Jessica. The pain was too raw. So I wrote about other things. I wrote about growing up on my parents' farm. I wrote about meeting Robert at a county fair. I wrote about the overwhelming love I felt the first time I held my son. And in writing the good memories, I found the strength to write the bad ones. Putting the betrayal into words, ordering the chaos of my emotions into sentences and paragraphs, stripped it of its power. It became a story, and I was the narrator. I was in control. I was making new friends, people who knew me simply as Carol, the photographer with a good eye, the potter with a determined spirit, the writer with a powerful voice. They didn't know my family drama, and they didn't care. They liked me for me. I was building a new community, a new foundation for my life, one that was not based on blood or obligation, but on shared interests and mutual respect. I was learning that family could be found, not just inherited. And while I was carefully, lovingly rebuilding my world, the world Jessica had built on lies was, unbeknownst to me, beginning to crumble. About 6 months into my new life, as the vibrant colors of autumn began to paint the Ohio landscape, the first tremors of Jessica's downfall reached me. The phone call, as it often did, came from my sister Susan. But this time, her voice wasn't filled with concern for me. It was filled with a kind of grim, vindicated astonishment. "Carol, you are not going to believe this," she said, practically buzzing with news. "It's all imploding. Faster than I ever thought possible." I was sitting on my back porch, sipping iced tea and reviewing the photos I'd taken that morning at a local apple orchard. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like watching a drama unfold from a great distance. "What's happened now, Susan?" "They're losing the house," she stated flatly. "Aunt Martha got a call from a friend who works in real estate. The foreclosure notice went public this week. They're at least 3 months behind." A part of me should have felt sad, I suppose. The house had been my granddaughter's home. But mostly, I felt a cold sense of inevitability. A life funded by deceit and propped up by stolen money could not stand forever. "But that's just the tip of the iceberg," Susan went on, her voice dropping conspiratorially. Jessica has gone into full panic mode. She's been calling everyone. Everyone. And the stories. Oh, the stories are a sight to behold. Susan proceeded to relay a series of increasingly desperate and contradictory tales Jessica had been spinning. She had called our cousin David, weeping, claiming they needed $3,000 for an emergency medical procedure for Lily that, of course, wasn't covered by insurance. The very next day, she called Aunt Martha with a completely different story. Michael's company had unjustly withheld his commission, and they needed $2,500 just to keep the lights on. Here's the beautiful part, Susan said, a note of triumph in her voice. David and Martha had lunch together on Tuesday. They compared notes. The whole house of cards is collapsing because she can't keep her own lies straight. The family, which had been so quick to believe her lies about me, was now seeing her true colors. The whisper network she had used to assassinate my character was now working against her, transmitting the truth of her own desperation and deceit. Susan relayed a particularly satisfying story. Jessica had called one of our more blunt cousins, a no-nonsense farmer named George. After listening to her 10-minute monologue about her financial woes, George had simply said, "Well, Jessica, did you ever consider selling that fancy SUV you drive? Or maybe returning some of those designer bags I see you carrying? Seems like you've got some assets you could liquidate before you come asking hard-working folks for a handout." According to Susan, the silence on the other end of the line had been profound, followed by a sputtering Jessica quickly ending the call. The narrative was shifting. The pity she had so carefully curated for herself was curdling into contempt. The poor, concerned daughter-in-law was being unmasked as a manipulative grifter. I want to take a moment here and just say thank you for sticking with my story this far. It's been a long and painful journey, but sharing it with you all has been incredibly healing. If you're still with me, if you're invested in seeing how this all plays out, please do me a favor and comment the number 1 down below. It helps me know that I'm not just shouting into the void. It truly means the world. Now, as word of their financial collapse spread, the lies she had told about me began to look even more absurd. People were starting to put 2 and 2 together. The financially irresponsible old woman was living comfortably and frugally within her means, while the concerned children were losing their home due to their own recklessness. The truth has a funny way of surfacing, even after it's been buried under a mountain of lies. But the final devastating truth was about to be revealed, not by a family member, but by Michael himself, in a confession that would expose a betrayal deeper than any of us had ever suspected. The knock on my door came on a cold, rainy evening in late October, the kind of night that seeps into your bones. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Michael stood there, a ghost on my doorstep. He was drenched from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked thin, haunted. The arrogant man who had screamed at me in my kitchen was gone. In his place was a broken stranger who looked startlingly like my son. "Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Can I come in?" I wordlessly stepped aside. He dripped his way into my kitchen and sank into a chair at the table, the same chair he'd always sat in. He stared at his hands, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I quietly made 2 mugs of coffee, placing one in front of him. The silence stretched on, filled only by the sound of the rain lashing against the windows. Finally, he looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a profound, soul-deep shame. "She lied," he said, his voice hoarse. "Mom, she lied about everything. But I was a willing fool. I believed her." And then for the next hour the full sordid story came out. It was worse than I had imagined. Jessica's manipulation of him had been as systematic as her manipulation of the family. "It started small," he explained, his gaze fixed on the steam rising from his mug. "She took over the finances right after we got married. She said I was too busy with work, and she was better with details. I was relieved, honestly. I hated dealing with bills." He let out a humorless laugh. What an idiot I was. He described how she had created a bubble of financial illusion around him. She would show him spreadsheets that painted a rosy picture, claiming her savvy budgeting and couponing were keeping them afloat. In reality, she was using my money to cover their massive overspending, and then hiding the rest on secret credit cards. "She controlled the information," he said, shaking his head. If you called the house phone, she always answered. She'd tell me later, "Oh, your mom called just to chat." But she'd leave out the part where you had invited us for dinner or asked about coming to Lily's school concert. She managed my entire social calendar. She would tell me, "Mom sounds tired, let's not bother her this weekend." Or, "Mom's been a little critical lately, I think we need to give her some space." She made me feel like I was protecting you by keeping my distance. He explained how she had weaponized his guilt. Anytime he questioned a large purchase, she would turn it back on him. "Don't you think Lily deserves the best? Don't you want your wife to look nice? Are you saying I can't have a few small things after all I do for this family?" He was so desperate to be a good husband and father that he'd back down every time. The final confession was the hardest. He had found the credit card statements, dozens of them, hidden in a shoebox in the back of her closet. Nearly $50,000 in debt, accrued under his name. Spa days, designer handbags, weekend getaways with her friends that she had told him were work trips. I confronted her, he said, his voice cracking. I laid the statements out on the bed, and she didn't even flinch. She immediately started crying these huge theatrical tears. "And she blamed you." I flinched even though I was expecting it. She said, "What did you expect me to do, Michael? Your mother cut us off. She was selfish. I had to do this for our family, to keep Lily's life from falling apart. I did this for us." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for some kind of understanding. And the most disgusting part, Mom, is that for a second a tiny part of me believed her. I was so deep in her web that I almost fell for it again. But this time the lie was too big. It had finally forced him to open his eyes. He had called Susan, then Emily, and for the first time he had listened. He had heard about the lies she told about my sanity, about the poison she had fed to their own daughter. "It's like I woke up from a coma," he whispered, tears now streaming down his face, mixing with the raindrops still in his hair. I looked at this woman I had married and I didn't recognize her. She wasn't just a liar. She was a monster. And I let her. Mom, I let her do this to you. I stood by and let her poison everything. Can you ever forgive me? His question hung in the air, raw and devastating. It was the question I had both longed for and dreaded for almost a year. Forgiveness was a complex, messy thing. It couldn't be given in a single moment. It had to be earned, rebuilt. I looked at my shattered son, a victim in his own right, and knew this was just the beginning of a long, difficult road back. Forgiveness isn't a switch you can flip. It's a landscape you have to travel through, full of rocky paths and dark valleys. Michael's confession wasn't an end. It was a starting point. Looking at him sitting at my kitchen table, stripped of all his former arrogance, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound, aching sadness for all the years we had lost, for the man my son could have been if he hadn't fallen under Jessica's spell. "Forgiveness is a long road, Michael," I said softly, my voice steadier than I felt. "It starts with you forgiving yourself, and it continues with you showing me, through your actions, that you understand the depth of the damage that was done." The divorce was swift and ugly. Once it became clear to Jessica that the bankruptcy meant there was no payday waiting for her, she became vicious. But Michael, for the first time, stood his ground. He fought for and won full custody of Lily, his primary concern now the well-being of his daughter, not the preservation of a lifestyle. Jessica vanished from our lives as quickly and destructively as a tornado, leaving a trail of wreckage behind her. Michael moved into a small bare-bones apartment that he could barely afford. He sold what was left of their designer furniture to pay for his security deposit. He took a job at a friend's construction company, coming home each night exhausted, his hands blistered and his body aching. It was a brutal, humbling fall from grace. But with every honest day's work, he was slowly, painfully rebuilding his integrity. He started bringing Lily to my house every Saturday morning. Our first few visits were achingly awkward. Lily, who had been fed a steady diet of lies about my sickness, was timid and watchful. She would barely speak to me, hiding behind her father's legs, her eyes wide with an uncertainty that broke my heart. I knew I couldn't rush it. I had to let her heal at her own pace. So I didn't push for hugs or demand conversation. I simply created a safe, warm space for her. I would have a puzzle set out on the coffee table. I'd bake her favorite lemon cookies, the smell filling the house. I let her approach me on her own terms. One Saturday I was out in the garden, tending to my rose bushes. Lily watched me from the kitchen window for a long time before she cautiously opened the back door and came outside. She stood a few feet away, just watching me prune the dead branches. "What are you doing, Grandma?" she asked, her voice small. "I'm just getting rid of the parts that are dead," I explained, not looking up. "It helps the healthy parts grow stronger." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that like what happened with Mommy?" I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. Her question was so simple yet so profound. "Yes, sweet girl," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I think it's exactly like that." She took a small step closer and helped me gather the fallen leaves. It was a start. The real breakthrough came a few weeks later. Michael showed up at my door one Saturday, holding his first full paycheck from the construction job. It wasn't much, but he held it with a sense of pride I hadn't seen in him in over a decade. "It's not $80,000 a year," he said with a wry, sad smile. "But it's mine. All mine." He insisted on taking me and Lily out for lunch, not to a fancy restaurant but to a simple local diner. As we sat in the worn vinyl booth, eating cheeseburgers and milkshakes, something felt right. Normal. Lily was chattering away about her new school, and Michael was telling me about his work crew. There were no pretenses, no facades. It was just us. On the way out, Lily spontaneously reached for my hand. Her small fingers curled around mine, a gesture of simple, unconditional trust. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. It was the first green shoot of new growth after a long, hard winter. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time I could see the path, and I knew with a certainty that warmed me to my core that we would walk it together. 1 year after that first tentative lunch at the diner, I stood in the bright, bustling gallery of our local community center. The air hummed with conversation and smelled faintly of wine and cheese. It was the opening night of my first photography exhibition. My heart, which had felt so bruised and battered for so long, was full to bursting. The walls around me were a testament to my journey, filled with images I had captured over the past 2 years. There were misty sunrises over the Ohio River, close-ups of resilient wildflowers pushing through cracks in the pavement, and portraits of the new friends who had become my chosen family. The centerpiece of the exhibit, hanging on the main wall, was a large black and white portrait of Lily. I had taken it just a few months prior. She was in my garden, her hair a wild halo around her head, a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and she was laughing a laugh of pure, uninhibited joy. I had titled it simply, Rebirth. I saw them before they saw me. Michael, holding Lily's hand, walked through the door. He looked different now. The haunted look was long gone, replaced by a quiet strength. The physical labor of his job had made him leaner, stronger, and the honesty of his new life had etched lines of character onto his face. He looked like a man, not the boy who had been so easily manipulated. Lily, now a confident and happy 8-year-old, spotted me and let go of her dad's hand, running towards me. "Grandma!" she yelled, throwing her arms around my waist in a fierce hug. "Everyone is looking at your pictures." Michael walked up, a proud, genuine smile on his face. "They're incredible, Mom," he said, his eyes scanning the walls. "You're incredible." Those words, coming from him now, meant everything. They weren't a platitude. They were an acknowledgement of the woman I had become, not just in spite of my trials, but because of them. My sister Susan was there, beaming. My cousins, my friends from my classes. My entire new, wonderful, supportive world was contained in that room. They all came up to congratulate me, to tell me how my story, which I had shared with many of them, had inspired them. My life now is so much richer and more authentic than it ever was when I was funding a lie. My photography has become a small, thriving business. My Italian class is planning a group trip to Tuscany next spring, and this time I know I will go. Most importantly, my relationship with Michael and Lily is real. It's not built on financial transactions or hollow obligations. It's built on shared Saturday mornings, on honest conversations, on forgiveness that was earned, and on a love that was tested and proven true. My story began with a single cruel text message that was meant to silence me, to put me in a box labeled old and embarrassing. But its sender, Jessica, had no idea what she was unleashing. She thought she was ending a chapter, but all she did was force me to write a whole new book. She set me free. Free from the obligation to please everyone, free from the fear of being disliked, and free to discover the woman I was always meant to be. Thank you all so much for coming on this long and emotional journey with me. The fact that you have stayed to the end means more than you know. My final question for you is this. Have you ever had a moment in your life that felt like an ending, only to discover it was a new beginning in disguise? Please share your stories of resilience, of finding strength in the broken places, in the comments below. Your story might just be the inspiration someone else needs to hear today. And if my story has touched you in any way, I would be so grateful if you would give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories of life, love, and the incredible strength of the human spirit. Remember, it is never ever too late to become the main character of your own story. I looked across the gallery at my granddaughter, who was proudly explaining the details of my photo to one of her little friends. I raised my own camera and captured the moment. Another memory, another piece of a life that was beautifully, imperfectly, and finally completely mine.